Hello and welcome, star people. This is APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, back with another episode of the Outlaw Astrology podcast. Now, today what we're going to be talking about is the transpersonal planets. And by that I mean Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are transpersonal planets. And what we're going to do today is talk about how they connect us to the collective consciousness. That's what some astrologers have the idea of, but today I think I want to go a little deeper into my own personal leanings. And what we're going to start with first is my own personal story of using these planetary forces in my own chart to help me navigate. If you like, however, my astral flow, please share, like, and subscribe wherever you're happening to be listening to podcasts. And in particular, if you could do me and the podcast a wonderful favor so that other people can find us, is leave a review on, in particular, YouTube if you can, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I appreciate you very much. Thank you very much. And now, onward. So, my own personal story with astrology comes from the fact, and if you're a little whir in the background, I'm the sort of person that cannot have complete silence at all times. I'm one of those people who are gently soothed by background ambient white noise, or green noise, or brown noise, depending on what I'm into. So today, I've got the fan on, one, because it's hot, and two, because I just really do find the sound comforting. In any case, I have what I would call a planetary problem child. And in my own personal chart, I have Uranus. Now, Uranus is more important in the house that it happens to be in than it happens whether or not it's in a particular sign, although that is useful. My opinion on that is that I think that's rubbish. I do it because previous to this recording, I felt that was the right choice to make. At this time, my opinion is I like to work with Uranus archetypally, and that archetype includes where it happens to be in sign and in house. In my case, Uranus is my problem child. It is the chart ruler of my chart, which sounds redundant and is, but that's the case of it. And when I've had challenges all my life with standing against authority and doing it alone. I have times when I've stood up for things and other people, the crowd, tended to go a different way, and I went my own way. And it can be very lonely at times when you find yourself going against the grain. We're not conditioned as humans, and I am not of the opinion that humans are naturally conditioned to go with the flow for its own sake. They go with the flow because it is practical. Because once upon a time, going with the tribe was useful. But since we do not exist 80,000 years ago, let alone a million years ago, to know how things actually were, what I'm doing here is supposition, which is what everybody does. We're assuming things based on who we are now and based on who we are personally and collectively. And so, with that said, I did not know that Uranus was my problem child until I one day, using my software, which is called Luna. I use different ones. I've been known to use Luna. Is my current favorite. I could go into a long treatise. That's an episode for another time. Uranus is my problem child. Looked at the aspects, and Uranus was not making fabulous aspects, okay? It was all the problematic ones, the challenging squares, the challenging oppositions, the challenging T-square of which it was a part, the challenging quincunxes to other parts of the chart or points in the chart. It was like, I did not know this. It didn't make the pain of the past go away, where you stand alone, because it feels very lonely to stand alone. Thinking, what? You people not going to stand up? I mean, you will benefit if I speak up, and you will say thank you if things work out, but you want to protect yourselves. And here's the thing, star people, that's not exactly how change works. Change does not happen magically. The world doesn't change into a great place for everyone if we sit around and we wait for a savior, or let one person speak up and then remain silent ourselves. And so Uranus for me is in a prominent place in my chart, in the upper part, that's the southern hemisphere in a chart, in a place that's very noticeable. And I am supposed to rebel. I am supposed to stand up. I'm supposed to speak out. I am doing what my chart blueprint is saying do. Now my chart blueprint and my chart ruler gets activated during a certain season. I'll keep that private for the time being. The only point that needs to be said here is that knowing that my Uranus was making so many challenging connections in my chart was useful and helpful. By the way, a square is an archetypal energy. Why? Because it's the energy of challenge. And oppositions are archetypal energies, which we'll go into, I'll go into deeper at a different time. But these are archetypal energies. So aspects are archetypal. In fact, there's very little in this world that we interact with that doesn't have an archetype. Even stories are archetypal. The hero's journey, for example, and by the way, I should note, just because I said hero does not mean I mean a gendered preference on that. Hero is non-binary, gender fluid, meaning that anybody of any gender identification can be the hero. And that is an archetypal story, okay? The story of the star-crossed lovers, for example, that is archetypal. The person who rises from lower economic or lower social status to upper social status, and vice versa. Those are archetypal stories, which is why movies and TV shows work so well, because they are playing on universal archetypes that all of us understand on a very deep level. That's why they work. Now, we're going to step into Uranus, and Uranus is called the Great Awakener. Isn't that a great title? It's a great name. The Great Awakener is a great archetypal energy name. I love it. So, Uranus is the revolutionary and the unexpected breakthroughs. Wherever it appears in the chart is where it's more concentrated, and any aspects it makes is going to give you more information on what other parts of the life it will affect. So, for example, you have Uranus as part of a grand trine involving Mars and the moon, for example, and they're all in, let's say, water for the sake of this. A grand trine is supportive energy, but it can also be a bit slow to start. It's not an initiatory energy. It tends to like to play within its comfort zone. Trines are supportive, they're lovely. However, the downside of a trine is that it isn't initiatory energy. It is sustaining energy. It is supportive energy, for example. So, Uranus in that type of chart connection, forming trines to, what did I say? I really can't remember what I said, but anyway, forming connections to other planets, and that gives you an idea that Uranus is supporting the moon. Uranus is supporting Mars. There it is, it came back. It's supporting these energies, and that these energies also, because it's Mars, and it depends on whether or not what's going on in the chart, motivated. Think of a rocket, Mars, and Uranus as an archetype, not considering whether or not it's a trine, etc. That's rocket energy. That's going straight up into the sky. It is shooting up its rocket. It is shooting up its energy. It's powerful, explosive. It is, I want to make change, and I want it now. I'm not willing to wait. There's an urgency there. And when you add the moon in this, it's safe. This energy feels safer with the moon involved in a grand water trine. It feels emotionally safer. And moon would be, possibly, it's in a water sign, very friendly energy for the moon. So here, pushing toward whatever's up there, out there, whatever, with that Uranus energy, I want to break through. Meaning a rocket going up into space, I'd consider that a breakthrough. That's futuristic. That's like, I want to help the people of the future by helping them go to the moon, for example. I want to be part of that. That is that energy. It is forward pushing. It is electric insights and sudden clarity, apropos of nothing all the time. It is quick, right there in your face, and then gone. It's brief. It doesn't announce itself with a long dialogue, monologue, or etc. It doesn't say, "Hey, here I come." It's just there and then not there. Okay, it's that fast. It's quick, rapid energy. Suddenly you didn't know, and now you know. That's how that works. And so some of the ways to work with Uranian energy is to find ways to find an archetypal name that works for Uranus for you. Now, if the Great Awakener doesn't rock your boat, you're free to explore, to ask yourself, what would I do or say or feel? How would I show up in the world if I weren't afraid of being unliked or being seen as not nice? What would I dare to say? What would I dare to feel? What would I dare to do? Because Uranus energy is daring energy. Just like Mars is daring, Uranus is a different type of daring, but it's also a daring energy. It requires courage to be able to look out into the frontiers of the unknown and to push toward it anyway. So, finding a way to personalize, meaning to make your Uranus connection more human, more personal, more you. So choosing your own archetypal name. And whatever house Uranus happens to live in your chart, what does that house look like? Visualize it if you can. Speak it. Whatever way works for you, choose 3 words that best describe that energy of the house. Because I like to, when I look at a chart, particularly in my chart, to make sense of it, I create atmospheres. I world build. That's what I do. I world build. I look at Uranus, I see it as a character. I said, if this character was a character in a novel I was writing, or a story, or etc., what would they be like? What clothes would they wear? How would they speak? How would they navigate the world? What would their domicile look like? So those are some of the ways that you can work with archetypal energy, because archetypal energy is story energy. It lends itself well to stories, which is why Jung loved it so much, and those people who follow Jung, of which I am one, that's why his ideas continue to this day, over 100 years after, about 100 years, over 100 years after he's, gone. But his ideas still have thrust. It still has, you understand? So, the current transits and what's going on with Uranus. Uranus is currently in Gemini. Haven't got there. No. Yeah, it's about to get there. Uranus is about to go into Gemini from after being in Taurus for several years. It was very grounded in Taurus, but however, values would change, our relationship with our resources changed, our relationship with what we invest in changed, and also what changed was how we enacted around the world. Our relationship with our environment changed. The environment and our environment. However, Uranus is not in its happy place in Taurus because it is exalted in the deep thinking, deep feeling Scorpio, which is a very provocative sign. Uranus in Scorpio loves to provoke. Uranus in Taurus tends to want to avoid that kind because provocation can incite change. And Taurus likes change so long as it's its own idea, on its own terms, which I readily encourage. Uranus going into Gemini would be called peregrine, which means that it's a wild card energy. It's remains to be seen energy. And the last time Uranus was in Gemini, I believe it was during the 40s, during World War II. And that energy, was very propagandizing energy. It was very chatty energy. Remember that Gemini as an archetype is curious, inquisitive, outward pushing. There are ideas out there, and give them. I want them. Talking, communicating, learning your own style of communication, and leaving behind the rest, which can look, because Gemini energy likes a lot of energy, it likes a lot of input, coming in from the world, which can look scattered to everybody else because they like to do a lot of things. Their energy tends to shapeshift. They're very fluid energetically. As an air sign, air is fluid. Gemini is also fluid. That may look scattered to everyone else, but that doesn't mean that it is. It just simply means they do not understand what's going on inside the Gemini. That's it. So, Uranus in Gemini is going to be about, we're going to be seeing some propaganda. We're going to be seeing all the talk, but whether or not it turns into action is a totally different thing. Gemini has the ideas for the revolution. It doesn't mean that Gemini is meant to go out there and always initiate. Some ideas are meant to be mental exercises, and others are meant to be acted upon. And Gemini is learning to discern, because it's very shapeshifty, which is which. And so Uranus energy is awakening energy. That means conversations that are going to make people's eyes pop open. Propaganda that eventually people are going, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. That sort of thing. Because in the 40s, that was a lot of propaganda films, making different countries look good so that they could make other countries look like the evil ones, and even the so-called evil countries, of which we know what I'm talking about, because there were 2, 3 at the time that suddenly were evil, which previously they were not, but now they are, and because they went against the interests of another group of nations. And so now we got propaganda, now we've got half-truths, we've got Gemini energy being used in a way that is less than ideal. That's the downside. There's gossip, that's what we call gossip, rumor-mongering without checking the facts, running with an idea without first preparing. That's the type of thing that happens with Uranus and Gemini. But also Uranus and Gemini is going to be the mic drop, saying things that people didn't expect, that does provoke, and out of nowhere, wild card energy, which Uranus really loves, along with Mercury. That's that type of energy that we can expect. So currently, as of July 7th, that would be, as of July 7th, that is when Uranus is going to be stepping into Gemini officially. And that is when we're going to have that. So currently, still in grounded Taurus, but once it moves to Gemini, now we've got all of these challenges to deal with. Now, next up, we're going to look at Pluto. I seem to be missing something. Okay, so we're going to be looking at Neptune. And Neptune is the mystic, the dreamer of the planets. Neptune is about dissolving the ego to a degree, dissolving the self to a degree, It is all that is spiritual and mystical. It connects us to that which is much larger than ourselves. And it's also knowing things that you don't have the ability to provide scientific evidence for, because we are a society that has moved from religion, which is a framework, to a scientific framework. So we have overcorrected and gone to extremes, which we will talk about more when I speak on Pluto. So Neptune is dissolving barriers between things. It is dissolving, ego structures. It is meant to dissolve structures. It is foggy. It can be confusing. It could be about disenchantment and disillusionment. And here's the thing. Being disenchanted and disillusioned does not necessarily mean it's a bad thing. You believed an illusion. Now you don't believe that illusion. And whilst that is uncomfortable, it is for the best that you be awake as much as possible to whatever is going on actually in life. So I would call Neptune the dreamer, the mystic. And that's that part of ourselves that connects to what you can't see, what you can't explain. Those strange experiences with the uncanny that you're just like, I don't know what happened. Knowing who's on before you even pick up your phone. The minute you hear it ringing or the music that it plays, you know it's your mom on the phone. And you haven't spoken to her in months, but you know it's her. That's the uncanny. That's knowing without having any cognitive understanding or comprehension as to why that might be. Okay? So we're looking at Neptune, we're looking at confusion. Confusion can be clarifying because you're confused about something and now you know that you're confused. Now you can seek clarity. If you didn't know you were confused, clarity is not likely to be nearby at any point in time. Okay? Being disillusioned is not a problem. You believed an illusion, now you're awake from that illusion. Disenchanted. Enchantment is another way of saying that you believe something that may or may not have been in your best interests. Neptune is also about compassion, self-compassion, especially if it's talking to a personal planet, and more of a wider, more broad compassion when it's in conversation with outer planets, the social planets and outer planets. So everything from Sun all the way to Mars, that's a personal conversation that the outers are having. And anything from Jupiter out to Pluto is an outer conversation, and we're talking about on the collective. Okay? And so, practical ways to work with Neptunian energy. Like I said with Uranus, Neptune we can do world building. Okay? And you can ask, wherever Neptune happens to be, whatever sign it's in, whatever house it's in, and any other key points that interest you, how does this character operate? How do they dress? How do they speak? What does their house look like? Their domicile? Because the house Neptune is located in, you can visualize, imagine it to whatever degree feels comfortable. You can imagine that energy and what its surroundings look like. And I feel this is helpful because it's story. And our brains, according to Lisa Cron, are wired for story. We have been telling stories since we could vocalize, since we understood that we could communicate with each other by vibrating the air around us. And then those stories turned into dances and into poems, into plays, into songs. As a matter of fact, I think music and dance were more than likely the first attempts at storytelling using a different medium. Looking up at the sky and telling a story about the stars twinkling, or the tree around us, or the cat that's sitting in the tree. We've been making sense of the world through story ever since we first walked across the savannas of Africa, and then migrated to Europe, and then migrated to the south to Australia and other places like that. So back to Neptune, that is one way to conceptualize that energy. If you want to know more, you can take it that further by looking at aspects, and the aspects will tell you, whether or not, okay, is this going to be an adventure? Squares. Is this going to be a moment of truth? Also a square. Is it going to come with a push and a pull? Because squares and oppositions are about quests. Nobody wants to read a story in which everybody, the character woke up, drank tea, painted, stared out the window for a bit, hung around with friends, and had a wonderful day, and then went to sleep, and everybody was happy. Nobody wants to read that story. That's why squares and oppositions symbolize those challenges and that push and pull with our inner world and the outer world that we have to enact with. And like I said, trines and sextiles are the gifts, the blessings. So if you're on a quest and you do role-playing games, you're going to have the superpowers, the strengths, the weapons, the tools that the hero will have that is going to help them meet their quest, meet the challenges that they're going to face. And currently, Neptune left Pisces and entered into Aries, where it currently is. It is currently retrograde. Retrograde energy is a pause to stop and reflect on where am I disillusioned? Where am I confused? Where am I disenchanted? What structures need to dissolve so that I can start a new chapter? Because Aries is the beginning of the zodiac. It's all about the new chapter, the new beginnings, and what you're going to need courage to start, to initiate. So those are the questions that a Neptune experience is going to afford us all on a collective level. As I've said, if Neptune is talking to personal planets, it is a more personal conversation. If it's having conversations with Jupiter on out to Pluto, then it's going to be a bit more transpersonal, okay? And so, next we're going to move on to Pluto, the transformer. Now, Pluto is the death and rebirth archetype. Endings are a very real thing. You can't start something and not expect it to end. The ending implies the beginning implies the end. And there we have our bone collector, which is an archetype. And the archetype for Pluto is the transformer. And this is the Plutonian process, which is very psychological. It is the deep work, the internal self-reflection, self-investigating, self-analysis of the psyche. Psyche comes from a word that means soul in ancient Greek and Latin. Okay, so we're talking about our souls, looking into the shadow work of, what people call looking into those dark parts of ourselves that we don't like. So the question with Pluto energy is, what don't you like about yourself? What were you taught, conditioned to dislike, to distrust in yourself? What parts of yourself are you not comfortable with? What parts of other people do you notice that you like a lot? Example, someone that you see as warm and friendly. Okay? That's called a golden shadow. And you're noticing something about them. Here's the interesting thing. It would be incorrect, inaccurate, and unwise to assume that everybody sees that person the same way as you do. You see it that way. That doesn't mean that everybody does. Let's not universalize our own perspective. Let's keep it personal and subjective. There is nothing wrong with the personal and the subjective. Without it, you're not self-aware. If you are not self-aware, how can you be who you are? If you can't be who you are, you cannot stand in an integrity, and you cannot honor your ethics, your values, your beliefs to a lesser degree. You cannot be who you are. And if you cannot be who you are, you're less likely to create a life that you want to live on your terms, because you don't even know what your terms are. And you don't have any sense of boundaries. And so Pluto is that energy that says all things must come to an end. That you might have believed this about yourself, but are you sure? Because Pluto, when it does a transit, or even in your personal chart, it is bringing the wrecking ball. And it's more of an implosion. Where I see Uranus as explosive, Pluto's more implosive. It's a quieter, it's like demolition experts used to explode buildings or knock them over with a wrecking ball, a giant ball on a chain. And then one day they got wise. You know, we could do a controlled demolition. And so now you see the building just gracefully just drop into a pile of rubble. I mean, there's dust everywhere, but that's Pluto energy. That demolition of putting dynamite in a building and doing a controlled demolition, it just implode elegantly, is very Plutonic. And so it's embracing necessary endings and powerful new beginnings. But here's the thing. Along with this process is also fear, loss, grief, heartbreak. Because sometimes you have to give up things that matter the most in order to embrace a new beginning. I mean, if you want to have your dream job, you can't hang around in your current job, even though you have a lovely group of work friends and a quite lovely boss and nice surroundings, but the job isn't speaking to your soul. It's not the path of heart. It's not engaging you anymore. You have to give up this comfortable spot in order to venture out into the unknown, where you have no idea what the outcome is actually going to be. So currently, Pluto is retrograde in Aquarius and has been hanging out in Aquarius since November of last year, where it arrived for good and will stay until, I believe, 2044. And that's a 20-year bent. Currently, as I said, retrograde, so it's an opportunity to pause and reflect. Where can you invite invention? What needs to be reinvented in you? Where can you invite innovation? Where do you need a breakthrough? Where do you need a fresh injection of novelty, of newness, of ingeniousness? How can you embrace your genius? And wherever Pluto happens to hang out in your chart, the best way I feel is to turn it to a story. World build. Pluto is a character. By sign and by house, you'll know, how does it dress? How does it talk as this character? How does it live? As this character, archetypally. You can also find your own archetypal name to make the Pluto archetype more personal to you and in your chart. So you can connect more deeply and then come up with questions. What does this tell me? Once you've got the world building down, meaning the Pluto character has maybe even a name and dresses like this, talks like this, lives in this sort of domicile. Now that you have that information, you can start asking questions of the character. And you can do this with Neptune and Uranus as well. Ask questions. Okay, what do you need to tell me? What do I need to know about my relationship to endings and beginnings? Okay? And next, let's look at how we can integrate these cosmic energies. So, how can they work together? Well, Uranus is, things have gotten stagnant, it must go. I must either explode it must be expelled, but it has to go. Neptune's like, I gotta dissolve things. It's like putting a sandcastle at the shore of the ocean. And it's beautiful and lovely, but the ocean's gonna come and grab it back. And that's Neptunian energy too. And they work together. Neptune dissolves, Pluto implodes, and
things don't last forever, because the only constant in this cosmos is change. And Pluto reminds us every day, every minute, every hour, that there is going to be an ending for all of us. There's an ending, there are short endings, and there are long endings. And we always are trying to make sense of how to do it as gracefully as we can. So, towards evolution, all of this is about letting go of things. So, with Pluto, you let go. With Neptune, you surrender. With Uranus, you have to, I would say, self-compassion there, because Uranus is swift. It's like the Eight of Wands card. It is swift, it is moving, it is fast, and you have to grant yourself grace. So I would say with Uranus, grant yourself some grace, because unexpected breakthroughs, whilst lovely, later may not feel good in the moment. And recognizing the signature on world events, I would suggest, using your chart and following transits. Technically, you follow transits with outer planets. You don't do it as much with inner planets, although you can. Outer planets take a longer period of time, and so we have more of an opportunity to study them and to experience their guidance, because they're way showers to show us how to show up or navigate our lives better. And that's the whole point of that. So the dance between the individual and the collective consciousness is how I would call this energy. And the whole point is to find meaning in challenge, in obstacles. So, to identify those energies, my suggestion would be to follow the world-building suggestions I've made, and to study those energies in your own life. You can also look back at the past. In the next upcoming episode, I'll be talking about archetypal relationships. Those will be the aspects, and what's going to go on with that is going to be, I think, pretty cool. So thank you very much for this shared journey. I appreciate you for being here. And until next time, I am APM. This is the Outlaw Astrology Podcast. And may your days be blessed with cosmic guidance and understanding, peace, and astro magic.